Hello everyone, and thank you for continuing to return to the channel. In today's video, the story continues to revolve around Tieu, a story that may sound familiar and ordinary at first, like so many other lives, yet the deeper we go, the more layers of overlapping memories and unspoken corners begin to emerge. It is a story not only of love, but also of silence, of secrets, and of choices made in moments that allowed no one the luxury of hesitation. And today, after enough time has passed, when everything seems to have finally settled, a truth that was buried for many years is at last revealed. The truth about little Ivy. A truth that suddenly makes everything once believed to be obvious feel fragile. Ivy, the child cradled in the love of what appeared to be a complete family, turns out to be the biological daughter of CEO Hoai. Few could have imagined that behind such a peaceful image lay a secret quietly stretched across the years. A secret with no noise or spectacle, yet heavy enough that once brought into the light, it shakes the emotions of everyone involved. Some cannot hold back their tears, realizing what they lost in silence. Some choose to remain quiet, burdened by regrets that come too late for any words to soothe. And some are overwhelmed by happiness, a fragile happiness mixed with longing and sorrow, because it arrives only after so many years of waiting. To understand this truth, we must turn back time to many years ago, when everyone was still very young. When Tieu and Hoai met, fell in love, and believed in love with the purity and intensity of youth. It was not a flashy romance, nor one built on distant promises. Their love was simple and quiet, existing in small actions, fleeting glances, and unspoken care for one another. They loved each other through difficult days, when life offered nothing but faith. No big house, no financial comfort, only two people with very little, yet always holding tightly onto each other's hands. That bond carried them through exhausting evenings, long days of worry, and moments when it seemed there was no strength left to go on. At that time, Hoai was not yet the CEO people would later come to know. He had no status, no assets, no support beyond himself. Just a young man with empty hands, carrying a vague dream of changing his life, and a heart fully devoted to Tieu. Each passing day, Hoai lived with the desire to rise, not only for himself, but for the woman who had believed in him and chosen him. And Tieu, gentle and deeply emotional, chose to love Hoai not for the future he imagined, but for who he was in that moment. She loved the sincerity in his eyes, his quiet determination, and even the way he tried to smile through exhaustion, so she would not worry. For Tieu, love did not need many spoken promises. Simply being beside each other was already enough. In the evenings after work, they would walk together along a familiar road, where rows of silent trees bore witness to countless small stories. There were no grand vows, only fragments of conversation about work, about life, about the simplest everyday things. Soft laughter echoed, easing some of the weight pressing down on their shoulders. It was these simple moments that shaped a love that felt real and close. And precisely because it was so real, so deep, it became all the harder to let go. That love grew quietly, yet persistently over time, like an invisible thread binding two people amid a life full of change. And from there, choices began to form, crossroads slowly appeared, opening the way to a chain of unspoken truths, until many years later, when everything seemed long settled, the truth still found a way to return. But that love, no matter how sincere it was, ultimately proved unable to withstand the harsh reality that gradually closed in around them. Tieu's family, especially her mother, had never looked at this relationship with sympathy. In her view, love could not replace food on the table, and emotions could not guarantee a stable future. Hoai, in her eyes, was a young man with nothing to offer on the scale of marriage. No money in hand, no social status, no clear path to prove that he could give Tieu a life that was secure and sufficient. She believed, absolutely, that her daughter deserved more than that. Tieu needed a solid life, needed a man who could protect her, shoulder responsibilities, and ensure that she would not struggle against the hardships of everyday living. In that way of thinking, the young love between Tieu and Hoai was nothing more than an impulsive emotion, one that sooner or later would have to give way to reason and obligation. At first, the opposition came only as advice, as disapproving looks, as words heavy with implication. But over time, it turned into crushing pressure, and then into demands that left Tieu with no right to choose. In the end, when every door seemed firmly shut, she was forced to accept another marriage, a marriage arranged to suit her family's wishes, yet completely foreign to her heart. Caught between her deep love for Hoai and the weight of her family, Tieu fell into a state of desperation. She was not strong enough to rise up against the people who had given birth to and raised her, those she carried within her heart with both respect and fear. Yet she was also not cold enough to erase the image of Hoai, the man who had occupied her heart throughout the most beautiful years of her youth. Those days passed in heaviness and darkness. Tieu lived in constant exhaustion, through sleepless nights where silent tears fell with no one to confide in. She felt as if she were being pushed along a predetermined path, where every personal choice became meaningless. That helplessness gnawed at her day after day, slowly erasing her smile until only quiet resignation remained. When Hoai learned that Tieu was about to get married, his world seemed to collapse entirely. All the dreams and hopes he had nurtured for the future suddenly felt impossibly distant. Yet no matter how painful it was, Hoai understood that he had no right to hold her back. He lacked the strength, the position, and anything at all to stand against the enormous barriers separating them. That pain forced him to swallow everything, enduring it in silence, unable to do anything more. No one knew that before they were completely torn apart by irreversible decisions, Tieu and Hoai shared one single night together. It was not a moment of reckless impulse, nor an unintended mistake. It was the final point of a love that had been suppressed for too long, the moment when two people realized they were about to lose each other forever. That night, they gave each other everything that remained: love, regret, and the words they had never had the chance to say. There were no promises of the future, only the shared understanding that when morning came, nothing would be the same again. It was a quiet night, heavy with emotion, etched into the memories of both as a wound that would never fully heal. Not long after, when Tieu was forced to step into that loveless marriage, another truth struck her, nearly breaking her completely. She discovered that she was pregnant. In that moment, Tieu was overwhelmed by panic, pain, and unbearable torment. Any fragile hint of joy was drowned immediately by fear and despair. She understood all too well that if this truth were exposed, not only would her own life collapse entirely, Hoai would be dragged into an inescapable spiral of trouble. Both families would be shattered, and the man who was about to become her husband, completely innocent in this story, would also be forced to bear a tragedy he had never caused. Faced with all those consequences, Tieu made the most painful decision of her life. She chose silence. She buried the secret deep within her heart, sealing it with resignation and wordless pain. Tieu stepped into a marriage without love, carrying an unbearable secret alone, and began a long stretch of living in silence, one where no one knew what she had sacrificed. The day Tieu put on the pure white wedding dress and stepped into the bridal car to marry a man who was not Hoai, that moment felt to him as if every last bit of strength had been drained from his body. There was no clear explanation, no proper farewell. Everything between them ended in a cold, sudden silence that was almost cruel. A love nurtured with so much hope, with months and years of sincerity and closeness, was abruptly cut off, not even given the chance for a final goodbye. Hai stood on the fringes of that story, with no right to hold her back and no position from which to question anything. All he could do was silently watch the woman he loved step into another life, while he himself could do nothing but accept it. That helplessness weighed on him day after day, squeezing his heart until it felt as though he could not even cry out. After that day, Hai left. He told no one where he was going, and left behind no message. Not because he wanted to run from responsibility or deny the past, but because he knew that if he stayed, facing familiar places and memories, he would not be strong enough to stand. Leaving, for him, was the only way not to completely collapse. The pain of losing Tieu did not knock Hai down immediately. Instead, it quietly turned into a smoldering fire inside him. That pain became the force that compelled him to change. With bitterness and fierce determination, Hai promised himself that he would never again allow anyone to look down on him simply because of the word poverty. He threw himself into work like someone with no way back. Long days bled into sleepless nights. His strength wore thin, but his will would not let him stop. Hai worked himself to exhaustion, accepted every challenge, and refused no opportunity, no matter how small, because he understood that every step forward, however slow, was the only way to escape his own painful past. 3 years passed. From empty hands and a heart full of scars, Hai gradually found his footing. He became a successful CEO, respected not only for his ability, but also for the perseverance and decisiveness forged during his hardest years. Yet behind that image of success remained a Hai who had been wounded, who had suffered loss, and who had never truly forgotten what had happened. What Hai cherished most, when he finally had everything in his hands, was not fame or money, but the ability to care for his mother. She was a woman who had endured countless hardships raising him alone, silently bearing every difficulty so that her son could stand tall in life. For Hai, being able to repay her and make up for what she had sacrificed was the greatest value of the success he achieved. Then fate once again led Hai back to the starting point of his old memories. In an unexpected moment, Tieu appeared before him again. That reunion carried none of the romance he had once imagined. There was no burst of joy, no sweet words, only a heavy silence and a sense of distance between two people who had once been so close. Tieu was no longer the protected girl of the past, nor was she living the comfortable life Hai had once assumed. Her reality was far harsher. She had been abandoned by her husband for failing to bear a son, driven out of the house like a stranger, left with no place in the family she had sacrificed her youth to enter. In her arms, she had only one thing left, the small child, Ivy. Hai did not reproach her, nor did he question how everything had come to this. He did not need explanations, nor did he want to reopen old wounds. In the moment he saw Tieu thin and exhausted, clutching the trembling child in her arms, Hai knew only one thing. He could not turn his back. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because the deep feelings within him had never completely disappeared. Hai opened his arms to protect the mother and child, offering them a home, a place to rely on, and a chance to start life over again. No noise, no display, just a quiet yet resolute choice, the same way he had once loved, and the same way he now chose to keep moving forward amid the twists of fate. Hai loved Ivy in a way that felt completely natural, so natural that he had never once stopped to ask himself why. From the very first days when Ivy was still a baby, through sudden fevers in the middle of the night, restless sleep, and moments when she startled awake crying from nightmares, Hoai was always there without the slightest hesitation. He held her in his arms, patiently soothing her, staying awake through countless nights just to make sure Ivy was sleeping peacefully. Everything he did came instinctively, without reason or calculation, simply because he wanted to. Ivy grew up day by day within that quiet care. From her first unsteady steps, her half-formed calls, to the moments when she clung tightly to his clothes and refused to let go, all of it became a familiar part of Hoai's life. He never drew any boundaries between himself and Ivy. In his mind, she was simply a child who needed love, and he was willing to give it to her fully. As Ivy grew older, she began to resemble Hoai in uncanny ways. Her eyes, her smile, even the smallest expressions would sometimes make Tieu catch her breath. But Hoai never doubted. To him, those similarities were merely coincidence. He never allowed himself to think otherwise, because in his heart, Ivy was simply a child he loved like his own. Nothing more, nothing less. In contrast to Hoai's ease, every passing day was a torment for Tieu. She watched the unconditional love Hoai gave Ivy, and that very love made the secret in her heart heavier than ever. Every smile from Ivy, every gentle gesture from Hoai felt like a soft but relentless blade, cutting deeper into her conscience. Tieu lived in constant inner conflict. On one side was her desire to protect the peace of the present, to avoid shattering the life Hoai had built. On the other was a truth she knew she could not carry to the end of her life. The more she witnessed Hoai's bond with Ivy, the more clearly she felt that she was hiding something far too big, something vital not only to herself, but to Hoai and to the child as well. When Ivy turned 2, Tieu knew she could no longer remain silent. She realized that if she kept running from the truth, it would only become more cruel when finally revealed. Years of guilt and inner turmoil eventually pushed her to a breaking point. One very ordinary evening. No drama, no arguments. Ivy was fast asleep, her breathing steady, her small face peaceful in deep rest. The room was so quiet that every breath could be heard. It was in that seemingly calm moment that Tieu gathered all her courage to speak the truth she had buried for so many years. She spoke slowly, her voice trembling, each word draining what little strength she had left. Ivy was not just a child Hoai loved. Ivy was his biological daughter, the child born from the love they once shared, the love they had been forced to let go of. In that instant, Hoai was frozen. All sounds around him seemed to vanish. He couldn't speak, could only stand there as fragmented memories rushed back all at once. The details he had once ignored, dismissed as coincidence, suddenly aligned with merciless clarity. Ivy's eyes, her familiar smile, the indescribable sense of connection, everything finally found its answer. Hoai broke down in tears. Not tears of anger or accusation, but the kind that burst forth after too many years of loss, the release of a truth that had finally been given its rightful name. In that overwhelming surge of emotion, he felt no hatred, only shock and a happiness that had arrived far too late. He pulled Tieu and Ivy tightly into his arms, his embrace trembling yet resolute. Hoai kept whispering his thanks, thankful that Ivy had come into his life, thankful that no matter the circumstances, his child had been loved and grown up safely. At the same time, he apologized for not being there when Tieu needed him most, for the years he had missed in his own child's life. Within that embrace, the past, the present, and the long-hidden truth finally converged, opening a door from which none of them could ever turn back. Hoai promised Tieu that he would never let the mother and child be lonely again, not even once. It was not a promise spoken in a rush of emotion, nor flowery words meant to soothe freshly exposed pain. That promise was born from clarity, from responsibility, and from a very clear understanding that from this moment on, he no longer had the right to stand outside their lives ever again. Hoai chose to keep that promise through his daily presence. No announcements, no need to prove anything to anyone. He was there when mornings began, when Ivy woke up with sleepy eyes. He took his daughter to school, holding that small hand as they walked along familiar roads, listening to Ivy's innocent stories told in her clear, bright voice. Moments that might seem ordinary to anyone else held a special meaning for Hoai, because they were the moments he had missed for so long without ever realizing it. In the evenings, Hoai came home earlier and more regularly. He sat down at the dinner table with his family, sharing meals with Tieu and Ivy in a warm, peaceful atmosphere. The heavy silences were gone, as was the old sense of restraint. Each meal became a thread that bound the three of them together, a place where they slowly but surely learned how to be a real family. On nights when Ivy fell ill, Hoai stayed awake. He sat by her bed, resting his hand on her forehead to check her fever, quietly changing compresses, gently soothing her whenever she stirred in discomfort.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình không làm video Hoài Ca nữa mà mình đưa đến một câu chuyện của Tiểu San. Nhưng mọi người cũng đã biết là Tiểu San là em gái của Hùng đó mọi người. Thì bây giờ mình sẽ xen lẫn cả câu chuyện của Tiểu San vào trong kênh nhé mọi người ơi. Hiện tại thì mình đang làm nội dung, mình đang viết nội dung và viết câu chuyện thì nó cũng chưa có xong đó mọi người. Tạm biệt mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở video sau nhé.